We welcome you to the podcast. Hope you had a great holiday. Looking forward to the new year. Great close to 2018. Rebecca Lowe, our soccer Premier League host in a little bit. But first, the voice of the NHL on NBC, the great Doc Emrick. So, Doc, Notre Dame and Notre Dame Stadium. Tell me what that means to your youth growing up in the state of Indiana and how excited you will be to work a game in Notre Dame Stadium to start 2019.
Well, my archaic times go back to the 1950s, and at that time the stadium was a little over 20 years old. And the teams at that time were not as good as Rockney's era and not as good as they are this year, but they were fun to watch, and the home games were on television in our area, and I'm not sure if they were on national television or not, but my brother and I were glued to the screen on Saturday afternoons, because that was what was moving. And we got a chance to see college football, and invariably it was Notre Dame. There were not a lot of regional schools that we did get to see, but Notre Dame was, of course, of great interest nationally, and so we did get to see them. Paul Hornung was in the backfield, sometimes as the quarterback, sometimes as a running back or an option in the backfield. And later on in that decade, Monty Stickles was the guy that used to secure games late with field goals, and Terry Brennan was the coach. And as I said, it was a time when maybe they weren't the best team in the nation a lot of that time,
right?
But they sure did fascinate me, and I have always dreamed of going to Notre Dame Stadium to see a game. I have never been inside the stadium, but I'm looking forward to it.
Fabulous! Oh, that it'll be so neat. And you do. We're there, Doc, 6 or 7 times during the year for the Notre Dame football games, and you get used to the familiarity of the surroundings and the walk and all that. But then when you do walk in and you're reminded of the history of Notre Dame football, and so much of it happened on that spot, and it still gets you. And I think you will have a wonderful time being there and being a part of it. Can you just take us back to the start of the Winter Classic, which involved the Buffalo Sabres playing Pittsburgh? Did you ever think that this event would continue to be this centerpiece of the NHL's regular season and a standout event as we were getting started with that first one in Buffalo back, 11 years or so ago now? 12, really.
Well, up to 2 weeks before the game was played, it had the feel of being one and done, as a noble experiment that might fall because they were having trouble moving the tickets. And there was concern in both Pittsburgh and Buffalo that the game might not be sold out.
That's crazy.
We were certainly interested in the fact that it was going to be a telecast of a hockey game from Buffalo, where there's all sorts of unpredictability for the weather.
Right.
But as it turned out, it wound up being a magical day. And I think, too, around the first period, Sam Flood and his brilliance had a meteorologist assigned to the telecast that day. And the radar showed this huge blob of white northwest of Buffalo. And we'd had some rain and some sleet. And this huge blob showed it was going to be snow. And I sort of compare it, Mike, to one of those construction sites in a big city where there's a wall up and there's a hole in the wall where you can come by and look in and see what they're doing.
Right.
And I think that was probably what was going on that day, because people started calling each other. I mean, Michigan was playing Florida in a bowl game at the same time. And people were calling one another saying, "Are you watching what's going on in Buffalo?" Because then, as predicted and as shown on the radar, here came the snow. And there were many stoppages to get all the snow off. This was not in the day of shovels. This was in the day of getting the Zamboni out. Let's get the snow off again, and let's continue to stop the game. But no one complained. None of the players complained, and we just kept going. And then it had the magical finish with the snow continuing to fall. I don't think any of us envisioned that it was going to be that kind of a storybook day, but it sure turned out that way. And in riding in our cars to the airport after, we knew we'd seen something special, and it was probably not going to be the last one. But a week or so before, not so sure.
That's so interesting. Oh, it's really interesting to hear the doubt and then the payoff. And you mentioned that bowl game. I mentioned on a conference call we did with the media, I was, I don't know why, it was one of the rare New Year's days that I was not working, and Michigan got dumped on with over a foot of snow. One of the biggest 5 or 6 snowstorms we've had in the 20 years that I've lived in Michigan. And we ended up staying at my brother-in-law's house, and we watched the Michigan football game, and on the other TV was the hockey game, and more people started to gravitate towards this unique vision of hockey outdoors with a little bit of snow. And, Doc, that's what I think retains the magic of it. For the players, it is that pond in the backyard or that pond in the neighborhood that is frozen over that they grew up playing on. Do you still see that youthful smile and enthusiasm when the players feel the fresh air of being outside as they step on the ice the day before or the day of the Winter Classic?
Yeah, it never gets old. And invariably, whether there's snow on the day of it or not, it seems like snow tends to arrive on the day of the practices. We saw that at Fenway Park right about the time that they were going to have their pictures taken on the ice, which is always traditionally the day before the Winter Classic at practice. And you don't worry as much about the sun if it's at the end of your practice as you do on the day of the event itself,
Sure.
because by then the adverse conditions of the ice are not a problem to you because you're not competing on that ice. You're just, going through the motions of skating with your family because practice is over, and they'll tend to the ice and get it ready for the next day. But you do get, that notion of having a team picture, and if the sun's out, it brightens the faces even more, and all the faces have smiles. Because in most cases, this is what you grew up doing. Wayne Gretzky said about these kinds of games, the games that you remember most were the ones that were played outdoors where there wasn't a scoreboard, there wasn't a clock, there weren't officials, and you didn't really care who won because it was just playing hockey for the fun of it. And that's what these games return you to. Yeah, you get 2 points if you win. You get 1 if it goes to overtime and you lose. But it's still that feel about it the day before, and it's that feel about it when you're playing in it.
What's the challenge for you as a broadcaster?
Well, it is an event that is fun, and you can't treat it as a day to call every name and number perfectly because our location, and it began that way at Michigan Stadium, and that was one of those glorious days, too. It's one of the best days in my memory bank from Winter Classics because it snowed all day. It was bitterly cold. We were freezing. We sought the refuge of a warmer place in the intermissions, but there was no place to go in the third period when my teeth were chattering, and it went to overtime and then went to a shootout. So I was pretty cold by the time it was done, but it snowed all day. The temperature was in the teens, and so the guys that got a lot of exercise were the guys with the shovels, and the house was 50-50 with Maple Leafs fans from either Eastern Michigan or Western Ontario who had come across, and it snowed all day, and it was difficult for people to get into town. It was difficult for them to get out. I remember talking with Tyler Bozak, now with St. Louis, but then with Toronto, who had the winning goal in the shootout, who remembered that the team bus was actually in danger of being late, not for the starting time of the game, but late for the time that the teams are normally in the dressing room, just because of the traffic being so slow getting in,
yes,
and all of that due to the snow. But it was a wonderful feel about the afternoon. We were down next to the glass, and Sam Flood called the next day and said, boy, was that ever a good look. And I knew that we were going to be next to the glass for all the Winter Classics to come. But the challenge, to answer your question, is you see one zone really well,
right,
and the other two zones you are blocked out by the penalty boxes and by the angle. And so what our telecast crew does is they lock off an end zone camera, and they run the shot that the end zone camera has shooting from the right to the left down the ice. And when the play goes to center ice, you look at that monitor and try to pick off identifying players that way. It's an imperfect science. And it's not necessarily about being perfect at your craft that day. It's about enjoying the day and trying to convey the spirit of it to people.
Well, and no one would ever know the difference, because the 6-time Emmy Award winner is the gold standard and the bar set for those who call this sport, which is so wonderful. I would love to get in, as we close here, just a thought on where the league is as we get around this Winter Classic time. Not the exact midpoint of the season, but we've had a few full months of play. And Doc, it's interesting. Here's a Chicago team that we thought maybe they could piece things together and one more run around their star players. That's not happening with them. They've had a coaching change. Boston's dealt with injuries. We're going to see them here. We're watching the teams that we saw last year, like a Tampa Bay, like a Winnipeg, like a Tampa, continue to have good seasons. Give me what you have seen and observed through the first 2+ months of this regular season.
I think probably to affirm what you've said, some of the stronger teams continue to be strong. Washington leads its division, and by a handful of points, a comfortable lead by the definition of our league now, because everything seems like it's always a logjam, and Tampa Bay is doing the same thing. The Pacific is going to be a logjam right down to early April when it eventually gets sorted out. But two things jump to my mind. Number one is that almost well over a third of our players are under 25.
Wow.
And so it is not a young man's game exclusively when you have Alexander Ovechkin at 33 scoring 10 goals in 6 games. And you have Sidney Crosby working on a solid performance since he came back from injury. And these are guys that are in their 30s.
Right.
But you have some thrilling stars that have burst onto the scene at 21, 22, 23 years of age. And so we have a wonderful blend of incredible talent in this league now, and not all of it is experienced, but
that's exciting.
All of it is skilled. So we have that. And the other thing, too, is if your team is not good this year, there's a good chance it will be next year. And if it was good last year, maybe it's not so good this year. New Jersey has had a struggle this year, for example, yet New Jersey made the playoffs last year. Colorado was awful, and then it has become strong. And so we have that contrast where you don't need to wait 5 or 6 years in most cases for your team to get good. There are enough teams in that middle ground trying to get wild cards that you're competitive right to the end.
That's exciting, too, for fans when you know it's not too far away. I remember the doom and gloom that people thought would be the season for the team that I see on a regular basis here where we both live in Michigan for the Red Wings, and then they've given a little bit of an enthusiastic boost, and then injuries set them back, but maybe they'll be able to hold it together, and it's a fun time in the league. And as we get closer to playoff time, I'd love to have you back to talk a little bit about your career and how you inspire and really reach out and help so many young broadcasters. There's so much I can talk to you about, but I wanted to make the focus on this visit, the Winter Classic, and I cannot wait to see you New Year's Eve in South Bend and get to ring in the new year with you and the guys. Doc, I look forward to it. You are a treasured part of our business. It's an honor to be a teammate of yours now with my time here at NBC, and I look forward to the Winter Classic with you and the guys on New Year's Day. Safe travels, and I will see you soon, my friend.
I thank you so much. You're so kind, and I will look forward to all the expertise you can give me on that tour of the stadium. Thank you so much.
Promise. Thanks, Doc. Our thanks to Doc. Let's talk soccer. Very busy stretch put on NBCSN between now and the start of the new year. There'll be a Premier League game. The top league in the world and the top host for the Premier League is our next guest, our friend Rebecca Lowe. Time now. Okay, and now to end the year, we've built up some good guests on the podcast, maybe a dozen or so. We end the final guest of 2018. We have truly saved the best for last. It is the incomparable Rebecca Lowe, the Instagram legend that is Rebecca Lowe. How are you, pal?
Mike Tirico, it's an absolute pleasure to be on your pod.
Oh, stop. You need a pod. Are you going to get a podcast soon?
I don't know, but I have the lowdown. So that's my kind of little thingy that you have the pod. I have the lowdown, which is my new YouTube show.
Wait. So you have your own YouTube show?
Yeah. How 2018 am I?
I didn't know that. What do you do on the show?
You need
Sorry.
to be subscribing.
I will.
Well, we don't. I mean, yeah, it's a Sunday. We record it on a Sunday. So once I'm done on a Sunday, what we do is we do the high. I give you the top goals and moments from every game of the weekend. I just do like a highlight rip for like 5-6 minutes, and then we come into the studio and then it's turning the tables time. And the boys ask me the tough questions.
Oh, do they?
As opposed to me asking them, which, by the way, I hate. And I have 30 seconds on each topic, and there's 5 questions. So it's really fun. It's just weird, as you well know, when you become the person answering the questions,
yes.
Which I just find really bizarre.
So let me do a few things here. Let me just talk about our Sundays because they're cool. Because our NBC Sports Group headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. So Rebecca is in one studio with the Robbies or Kyle Martino or some combination of the guys, and they're on the air. They're at dark 30 in the morning, and they're on till mid afternoon. Mm-hmm. We come in about 10 in the morning I come in at least for our Football Night in America meetings on these 20 Sundays that we're in. And so I as many of you know, I have come to love the sport. My son played at a decent level while he was in high school. I covered 2 World Cups, Euros in Paris, which was a blast. So I got to work with the ESPN soccer group right after Rebecca did. So everybody told me how unbelievable Rebecca was, and then we had never met until Rio, which was 2 weeks into my time at NBC, and then we worked back-to-back at the Olympics there, and then we worked in South Korea here this past February, which feels like it was 20 years ago, by the way. My gosh.
I know. I know.
But I love
we're reunited.
I know. I love my little stop, and I stop in and watch 5 or 6 minutes of the match that's going on Sunday mornings, and I love it because you guys have these big screens, and you're all sitting there and going back and forth and watching the games and having fun. You really have to have that great enjoyment of the people and the sport for the hour that you guys are there every Sunday for 30 some odd weeks. I really get a sense that you enjoy when the games are on and watching the games with the guys.
I do, Mike, and I think that a lot of that's down to the people, like you say. I mean, I love Robbie, and Kyle. They're the best of the best, and we've been together coming up for 6 years now, so it's like a long marriage.
Wow.
And so far, it's going okay. We're not in any counselling yet. It's going okay. They're brilliant. We have such a laugh, and I think a lot of that is down to, as former footballers, and I don't know if it's the same. I'm sure it is in American sports, but there's a lot of what they call banter and a lot of teasing each other and messing around, and every day is filled with, right, who's top of the mean league today? Who's been the meanest today? Because we're just so mean to each other all the time. But we love each other, it's fun mean. And then everyone, all the backup staff, we have an amazing team, many of whom have been there since day one, which is really great to have that core. And then the new fresh faces who come in, and we actually went out for a team dinner a couple of weeks ago with some of the young, I call them young kids because I just feel so old now, but the young kids who work in the tape room and who turn around these games in like a minute and bring us amazing highlights, and these guys love their job. And so everyone's together on what are difficult hours, and it's not very social. I've never had a social life since I turned 21 because I've worked in soccer, so weekends are gone for me and always have been. So I'm kind of used to it now, and holidays as well. I don't have any of those either. So I'm kind of used to that. But I do look at these young kids sometimes and I think, gosh, what have they signed up for? But then you're there in the moment, and you get to watch all these games. And the third reason why I love it so much is because the product is, on the whole, I would say 90% of the time we get like big moments in the studio every weekend where one of the guys is like, whoa, oh my goodness, or there's like a big drama or big story, and that is why we love it, because that means it's never boring.
Yeah, it's so true. So let me back up here a second, because you've told this in a variety of places, and I've read the story. But if you can just, in 30 seconds to a minute, just your path to the plane that you got on to move over here to do this role 6 years ago, because it is pretty fascinating. The people who listen to this, who might be interested in getting in the business, Rebecca's journey is a great reminder that there is no clear, direct path to get these jobs. They all have a little bit of luck, a lot of bit of preparation, and some divine intervention in a lot of ways. So go get them.
Absolutely. Okay, so trained to be an actress at college, wanted to go and be an actress. When I graduated, I had made a very good friend at college who was a year below me, and we were going to kind of set the world alight with our comedy duo act to become super famous, and everything was going to be great. Unfortunately, during the year after I graduated, while I was waiting for her to graduate, I applied for a competition at the BBC, which is obviously the biggest broadcasting network in the UK and the oldest in the world. And it was a search for a soccer reporter. Long story short, I won it 6 months later, rather shockingly, to be honest. I've always loved soccer, but it was just never on my radar to go into journalism. So I took the job at the BBC for 6 months. Well, you had to. I mean, it was an amazing prize. And then once I was through the door, I knew there was no turning back, and I loved it. And I spent 4.5 years at the BBC, realized I'd hit a ceiling. I was a bit like a youth team player who'd always been at the BBC and was never going to get the big gig because I'd kind of come through the family. So I decided to leave, which my dad almost disowned me about. And I know he didn't, but he was devastated because nobody leaves the BBC. Right. And I took another job at a brand new startup company for 2 years. So I took a lesser high-profile role, but one where I knew I could grow. I did. The company went bust. Not a fun summer. But then I went to ESPN UK, where I started to dip my finger and toe into American television by being able to come and work on ESPN, the USA channel, and work with Bob Lee and do the Women's World Cup and the Euros. And that, I think, got me seen in the US. However, just before I got the call from NBC, I had basically 90% decided to leave the industry because I was done with a mixture of being a female in a man's world in the UK. I was kind of done with being treated in certain ways, and I felt like I was never going to get that big gig. And so I'd kind of spoken to my father and my husband about it and said, I think I'm done. And you know what, I'm okay with that. And then about 3 weeks later, my agent called me and said, are you sitting down? And the offer came in from NBC, and the rest is history.
Oh, well, thank goodness for us and for American soccer fans. Man, you said so much there that I can ask you a million questions. I want to ask you a more sports nerdy question because you've talked about some of those other topics that you brought up there. So you're covering a sport that you really, other than maybe the 1 or 2 times you go over during the year, you're not in the country. You're not there. Mm-hmm. It's really easy for me I travel, so I go out to do a game in Denver, and you just get a vibe of what's going on, and you're there with the Broncos, and you get to sit face to face. You have none of that for the most part, being over here for 33, 34 of the 36 fixtures for a team in the Premier League. So how do you go about bridging that gap of being up to the second, servicing the viewer, yet not being able to get there and do any gumshoe work, as we used to call it here in the U.S., by getting your feet on the ground and talking to people?
I think it's twofold. I think one is I have access to, of course, everything that I need in terms of research. So I subscribe to 2 newspapers every day to ensure I'm reading all the articles I need to read. I'm following a lot of journalists on social media. Plus, I do listen to Talk Sport Radio, which is the 24/7 sports radio station in the UK. But a sports radio station in the UK is basically a football station. Right. So I listen to that all the time when I'm not with my 2-year-old, and when I'm by myself at work, at the hotel. I have it on all the time, and it's just
that's so antisocial.
It is, but it is. And my husband often comes home and he walks in and he's like, "Can we get some music on?" I'm like, "No, I've got to listen to Talk Sport." He's like, "Oh God!" But that's what I have to do because, like you say, I'm not there, so I don't have access to as much of that in England. The other thing is 2 things. One, having worked on the sidelines of the Premier League for 4 years and for many years before that within the Premier League doing reports and interviews, I kind of know enough about these clubs, these fans, the intricacies of everything that's going on inherently in my experience. So that helps me with kind of how I think a club will react or what kind of fans want from that particular club. So I know that. And then, of course, Robbie played there. So I can say to Robbie Mustoe, okay, so you've played at Old Trafford. Tell me what you think the fans will be doing now, or tell me what you think the club will be doing, or tell me what it used to be like. So we have that as well. So I think the 3 of those aspects make me feel like we are there.
Yeah. And it shows. It feels like that on the air. It feels like you guys are so plugged in. So we're recording this. There's no reason to hide. It's a podcast. It's the holidays. We're recording this 9 days before it dropped, and Jose Mourinho was let go, left, however you want to describe it, with Manchester United on the day that we are sitting down to record this. And you have, I think, a great perspective because Premier League managers just kind of spin through so fast. And you have now lived in the States for 6 years and lived it in a different way because your husband has been involved on the coaching side in soccer now that you all have moved here to the U.S. I'm just curious, as you watch our other sports, and I know you're not close to the NFL or the NBA, but you hear all the conversations about managers and different things like that in U.S. sports. What is it about Premier League managers, especially at the big 4, 5, 6 clubs, that it feels like the manager takes on this incredible, big, larger-than-life figure that is dissected and talked about probably inordinately compared to what they do on a regular basis? What is it about those jobs at those clubs in the Premier League?
It's interesting you say that compared to what they actually do. I'm actually not sure that that's true, Mike. I think that they do, and having, as you say, I'm married to a manager. I've watched him do a job at a lower level, but it's the same job ultimately. Right. And they basically have a say in everything.
Right.
So a manager's job is so full, and therefore so often they're the fall guy because so much of it comes back to them. I think the other thing is that these days there are things like director of football. So there is a man above the manager, between the manager and the owners, right, who kind of is supposed to be there to help the manager and kind of protect him a little bit. But that never used to be the case. That only started to come in 10, 15 years ago, and it's been very slowly coming in. For years and years and years, the manager, I mean forever actually, and we're talking over 100 years of football history in the UK, the manager ran everything. From... I mean, everything. Yeah. Just like I've listened to my husband negotiate player contracts on the phone with an agent. That doesn't happen so much anymore. But because down the years that's been the way it is, the perception in the UK is that the manager is the reason, for everything that happens. Even if maybe that isn't true, but it is still fairly true. I mean, Sir Alex Ferguson, for nearly 27 years at Manchester United, did everything except coach, funnily enough. He didn't do a lot of coaching, but he employed brilliant coaches, and he oversaw them. But they are seen as the figurehead. They get paid at that level. They get paid handsomely, as you well know. And that's what they're signing up for. But it is, I know what you mean, it is very much an obsession, and I think that is born out of history where they have always been these figureheads. And it's on the decrease slightly with the rise of a director of football, right, but I think it's always going to be that way.
I think I probably should have asked it better. Understanding the director of football role has increased a little bit more, yet with the big 5, 6 clubs, it still feels like there's a larger-than-life. Maybe it's because Sir Alex's presence, Arsene Wenger's presence over the years, they were there for so long and so monumental that now everyone who comes into these jobs, either they're compensated with obscene numbers relative to what we might see elsewhere in other clubs, but also you're expected to carry these legacy clubs on through the way they were, and it's just a little bit of a different world. Is the Premier League still the premier soccer league in the world?
In my opinion, without a doubt, and in my opinion, nothing's even close at the moment as things stand. La Liga got quite close over the last 5 to 10 years with the Real Madrid-Barcelona rivalry, but that's petered out a bit. Real Madrid have gone off the boil. Barcelona are not the team they used to be, so it's not quite as exciting, and the rest of La Liga is not great. Whereas this past weekend, Arsenal were 21 games in all competitions unbeaten, and they get beaten by Southampton, who are second bottom of the league, who've just got a new manager. And we get those moments at the weekend. Plus, every player wants to play in the Premier League, and they grow up, whether it's in Croatia or Bulgaria or Spain, they want to play in the Premier League. They see these great clubs. We don't just have 2 clubs that can win the Premier League. We have at the moment 6. And that used to be 4. So it's actually getting better and bigger and more attractive. And the talk of the bubble bursting down the years, no one talks about that anymore because it's just not going to happen. People absolutely love it. And there isn't a better league for me around the world.
All right, couple things here real quick. You see the way we treat football in America. Do you see parallels with the passion for the big teams, the legendary franchises in American sports, with the parallels that you see for Manchester United or an Arsenal or Liverpool or Chelsea or teams like that? Do you see the parallels now that you're living here the last 5-6 years?
Yes, in a way. I mean, I haven't been this close to the NFL to have a brilliant perspective on this, but I see there is definitely a parallel in terms of passion, commitment, knowledge, and everyone wanting to be the coach of the team. The difference for me is in the atmosphere in the stadiums.
Right.
If you go to a Chelsea against Tottenham game and there's 60,000 people there, it's not always particularly nice. It's quite hostile, and I don't get the impression, partly because you don't have the away fans element. On the whole, fans don't travel. Am I right, Mike, to games where they play away?
They do some, but it's not as though there's your section. And especially with the derbies, where, okay, you're here, and there are guards lining the aisleway of the section to keep your fans separate. Now, it does look, there are bad incidents. There's hostility in American football. If you go to some stadiums wearing the jersey of another team, you'll get yelled at. There are incidents that happen in the stands, but by and large, it's not. Here's a section of 3,000 fans from the other team, and there's always going to be that traveling group, especially with the Big Six clubs. So it is a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of that's obviously to do with the geography. So that in the UK, you can take a 3-hour drive and get to another club. And so that's why there is that away fan element. It's become part of the culture. But the hostilities and the kind of the 135, 40-year rivalries just mean that it's less about entertainment in some ways, and it's more almost about religion in a non-religious way. I would say it's tribalist. It's full of tribalism.
Yes.
And I don't see that here. I see an intense love and an intense commitment, and I might be totally wrong, but my perspective is it's more, and maybe because the NFL is less than half the age of soccer in the UK, it's in your blood. You're born into this. It's like a religion in the UK. And maybe it'll become that way here. But I would say it's even more intense going to a game than it is here. And here I feel like everyone behaves a lot better, and everyone seems. I went to an NBA game in New York, and it just seemed to be like a really nice evening out, and just let's go and get a hot dog halfway through the game, and just come back, and this is fun. And the baseball goes on for like 3 hours, and we can just dip in and dip out. It's not like that. You go, you sit, you don't move, and then you might get a pie at half time, and then you go back and you sit and you don't move. And then you go home, and you either cry or you're the happiest person in the world. And that's how extreme it is.
I love that. You know what has been eye-opening to me, covering Wimbledon for 6 years with ESPN, going to the Village there and understanding the history of their club. A good friend of ours, Julie Foudy, her husband grew up in Sunderland, and watching a club that was in the Premier League and then gets relegated again, and just seeing what that means to the people who have been connected to that town. Like when you said the word tribalism and the tribal nature of it, that's just what resonated with me, and that's what sticks. Go ahead.
I mean, Mike, Sunderland, I'm sure you may have heard of, if not watching, the documentary on Netflix right now, Sunderland Till I Die.
I read the article on SI.com about it, and I made a note that I want to go watch that. I have a little note here actually on my desk.
You will love it.
It describes it all, doesn't it? The real tribalism, the passion of it?
It does, and it will give you an insight into this city. And I think one of the fans actually said it in one of the episodes. This city of Sunderland exists for the football. It used to exist for the pits and for the docks and for the shipbuilding. No, they've all gone. All those jobs have gone now. These people live for this football club. And when it is relegated, and then, as you say, relegated again, and it's the size that it is, and it's the centre of all these, and I'm talking hundreds of thousands of people's lives are centred around that club. I don't see that in the States in a similar way. There isn't that working class element in that way. It's very unique and definitely something to be savoured. And Sunderland is not alone. I can give you 40 other examples.
Yeah, when Roberto Martinez was manager at Wigan, I came to understand what the team meant to the town, and then they get relegated, and then you're searching online for their score because they just disappear from your conscience. And so last two things I want to hit with you. We had and this is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, and I never got there because you're so darn interesting to talk to. We had a good argument about relegation. And I'm sitting there, so it's a Sunday morning. We walk in, we're having, I have my coffee, I'm watching a match. Rebecca's sitting there between matches, and we started this, not argument, this intelligent conversation between two people about relegation. And I was explaining to Rebecca why relegation would never work in American soccer, because you can't go to New York or Los Angeles and say one of your teams is playing in a lesser league. That just doesn't sell in a sporting city where we have 4 or 5 options. So you can't come to some of these big cities and say, we're big time, but right now we're in the minor leagues, the second league, and we're trying to get back up to the first. But those of you who love soccer and have grown up with the Premier League, you believe that if soccer is going to get to a next level in the U.S., that we need some relegation promotion. And it's fun. So you convince me why I'm wrong again, because you did once. So go ahead.
Mike, I really believe it. I really so believe it. And I also believe that the soccer fans in the US, if you sit most of them down, they too will believe it, because they understand the competitive nature that a relegation promotion system would bring. I understand what you mean about New York and LA to an extent, but I'm not an American, so I don't fully get that. But I do understand where you're coming from. It's not a permanent thing, so that's what's so exciting. If LA are rubbish, they'll get relegated. So just don't be rubbish, number one. And number two, if you get relegated, the party, when you come back up, because, by the way, let's be honest, as with everything in life, LA and New York are probably a bit like the Man United and Man City. They're not going to get relegated because they're going to have enough money to always buy the best players, because the best players, guess what? They want to live in LA or New York. So, on the whole, those areas and those cities are not going to be those that one's under threat. It will be those smaller cities.
But, Beck, what happens when it's Atlanta? What happens when it's Dallas? We have too many big cities.
But that's the nature of it. I mean, that's the nature of it. Be good enough not to go down. I mean, Sunderland are a massive, massive club. Nottingham Forest won the European Cup 2 years in a row in the 80s, and they haven't been able to get back in the Premier League for nearly 20 years. The fans still go to those games because the fans understand their love for the club. Now,
and that's my argument. That's my argument. That won't happen here.
Yes, the fans still. It will. I believe it will, because I believe that the American soccer fan is so in love with their club that because they are so knowledgeable about how football works and how relegation and promotion would, in the end, be a positive thing for the long term, and will get better players and all of that kind of thing, they would still go. Atlanta fans would still go to watch their team. Okay, you might have a quarter of them less, but they'd still go.
Yeah, that's.
I have more faith. I have more faith in the American soccer fan than you, Mike Tirico.
No. I have an American soccer fan in my house. My son wants to know what Chelsea's doing before anything else. What are the Robbies and Rebecca saying about Chelsea? That's all he wants to know. More than he'll ask me about the NFL. And we have so many kids.
Mike, when your son has a son, I want your son's son to be asking his dad what's happening with Chicago Fire, if that's the team, for example, before Chelsea, because I want MLS to grow in this country. I don't want it to be, in a funny way, I don't want my show to be the biggest soccer show in the country. I want MLS to be massive, because when MLS is massive, then America's woken up to what this beautiful game is. And in order for MLS to get to that level, it needs to have promotion and relegation. It needs to attract better players. It needs to have better coaches. It needs to have better academies. But you have to have promotion and relegation in order to create a competitive situation. Otherwise, as we see every season, halfway through the season, it's done.
Now you know why I wanted to have Rebecca on, because we were having this argument in the middle. She's no, I love this. I love this because you did get me to see that. I struggle with the number of big cities. If you tell Miami or LA or New York for a year, hey, hang on, we'll be back. Just kind of fight through here in the USL or whatever the second league will be at that moment. I just don't know if the people are going to support the franchise, and then I get worried about it. But you're right. That is the way it has worked. That's the way it works around the world. It would signal that the U.S. isn't by itself. It can be part of the global soccer community. But it's just a blast. And by the way, you did say in there that your show is the most popular soccer show in America. I just want to make sure America heard that properly.
I think I said the biggest and the most watched, which I would say it is. It's the biggest in terms of length, and it is the most watched, Mike Tirico. So I am bigging us up today.
Last one. You crack me up? Did you enjoy the Olympic experience as much as I did?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I enjoyed Rio loads because I got to actually meet you and get to know you, and we were working together, which was so super fun. And we were both it was both of our first Summer Olympics, so we were both a bit like, what on earth is going on? Where are we going? What's happening here?
We're standing on a beach. We're standing on a beach, and people are looking at us.
I know. Oh, that was so funny. And then the one in South Korea, I didn't see you as much because our timetables were completely opposite because I worked nights and you worked mornings. Wasn't that right, I think? Or the other way around? I forget. It was a long 3.5 weeks, but it was great. And I got to see Shaun White win, and it was just, I mean, it's the most fun thing ever.
It was pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. All right, I kept you much longer than I wanted to, but thanks. You're on like every day with bad Christmas sweaters, Boxing Day, all the way through. That was a couple days ago, all the way through. So as you're listening to this, as this has been downloaded, Rebecca's in the middle of like every day. Just turn on NBCSN, and she and the guys are doing a match. Merry Christmas.
You got it.
You're the best.
Thanks, Mikey.
Thanks to Beck. Thanks to Doc. Thanks to Alex Hardy for putting it together, and most importantly, thanks to you for downloading it, and a very happy New Year. We'll see you on the other side of 2019 with a lot of fun stuff. Mike Tirico Podcast here on NBC Sports Radio and NBCSports.com. Happy New Year, everyone.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.